My name is Ralph Scott and I'm the research manager at The Challenge, which is the UK's leading social integration charity.
What will you be discussing this evening?
So this evening, what I'm intending to talk about is essentially to better understand the divisions in UK society that led to the referendum result that we saw last year, and not just the result itself, but also the kind of surprise and shock that I think was felt on both sides of the division between Remainers and Leavers in that vote. From kind of analysing the vote, it's pretty clear that British society was divided by social class, by level of education, by age, also by geography and place. There's quite significant geographical differences in the way the vote is distributed. Also, what that reflected was a kind of underlying social and values divide. And that's what we're really interested in at The Challenge, is this idea that people are living in bubbles where they're only really spending time with and mixing with people who are very similar to them, and therefore they're not getting experience of difference, which would open up give them a better idea of what other people's lives are like, and also make them feel less worried about that difference, and therefore create a kind of more integrated society.
Can you talk about the value of using a place-based approach to better inform decision making?
Yeah, so I think, if you look at how the vote was distributed for the referendum, which I think is a really useful way of examining the divides within British society, just because it's almost exactly half of the vote, and there were very clear relationships with various other kind of demographic divides which we know about. There's also some quite clear geographical patterns in terms of areas that have experienced deprivation, or areas which have lost kind of industrial productivity over the last 20-30 years. Also areas that have experienced quite significant population change in terms of demographics and numbers of people in the area. Those all influenced how people tended to vote. So thinking about it in terms of looking specifically at those areas and thinking about the dynamics within those areas is really important, not only to better understand the issues, but to understand how they can be solved, so what the policy solutions might be. And if we think about what the Department for Education are currently doing on their opportunity areas policy, for example, where they're picking particular areas where they've identified there's educational underperformance, they're targeting lots of resources and developing a deliberate strategy which is relevant to that local context. And there's potentially an argument that in terms of things like social integration, that doing the same might be quite valuable, because the issues in terms of social integration might be quite different from area to area. So it might be more around ethnicity or faith in one area, but more around social class or income in another area. So better understanding how those divisions have sprung up and what those bubbles are is really quite important for developing policy solutions.
How can we develop people's potential for addressing challenges in their own communities?
So it's a really good question, and this is something which the Challenge does on a day-to-day basis. This is the main objective of the Challenge. So the Challenge is the largest provider of the government's National Citizen Service Programme, which 100,000 young people took part in last year, 16-year-olds. And the way that the programme works really is to develop young people's skills and capabilities to solve problems within their local communities. It has lots of other objectives, including giving young people that opportunity to mix and meet people who are different to themselves by ethnicity and social class, and be less concerned about that. But also to provide them with the skills and a 2-week period where they're in their community working on a social action project, looking to kind of address a particular social problem. And we think that's really important to giving young people a stake in society, and also making them kind of raising their feelings of efficacy, that they can actually achieve something if they put their mind to it, and better understanding what the levers of power are within their local community. And we've built on the kind of success of the NCS programme with a new programme that we started around 4 years ago, called Head Start, which those young people that have been through National Citizen Service are approached and asked if they want to undertake more volunteering work, and in exchange they get employability training and a kind of guaranteed job interview, because what we recognised is that the work that they were doing in their community was also equipping them with lots of skills which are relevant to the workplace, so it kind of all fit into one piece, and that's one of the things that young people were really saying they valued about their experience, was not just that it felt like they were helping to achieve change and making a positive difference, but also they were gaining skills which were helping them later in their life.
What is your one recommendation for policymakers?
So I think the key recommendation is really to think about, is to look to develop a social integration strategy. There's been a huge change in British society over the last kind of 50 years. Society's got a lot more diverse, both in terms of ethnicity and faith, but also in terms of social class. You know, there's been a lot of upheaval in terms of social class and income over the last 50 years, but there hasn't been a lot done either in policy terms or indeed in civil society terms to address this. Our founder, John Yates, likes to talk about how the Victorians also saw quite a lot of severe kind of social change and established institutions to help manage it and to give people a sense of belonging and that opportunity to mix, things like the trade unions or kind of churches and associations related to churches and working men's clubs and other kind of civic associations. And there hasn't been an equivalent growth of organisations that enable people to mix across those boundaries and begin to identify with one another. So in policy terms, what that means is, supporting, the government's done a good thing by supporting a programme like NCS, by providing that opportunity for young people to mix, but looking for other opportunities across the life course, whether it's new parents or doing more to integrate newly arrived migrants in terms of opportunities to learn English and just opportunities to integrate more generally in the communities in which they're based. Just being a lot more explicit about social integration is something which I think policymakers really need to be thinking about.